Hello and welcome to Caregivers Connect, a special Giving Tuesday live stream event. I'm Marie Falbo. For the next 45 minutes, you will hear from 3 caregivers about how Alzheimer's disease has impacted their lives. We'll also speak with Ken Zaentz, President and CEO of Alzheimer's New Jersey, about the support they provide. So without further ado, let's meet tonight's panelists. First, we have Kristen Davey. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please briefly explain your connection to Alzheimer's disease.
Of course. So my mother, Diane, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about, at this point, 12 or 13 years ago when she was only 60 years old. So right after I graduated college with early onset. And so my family has, over the last 12 to 13 years, really been through the ringer. She's very progressed now. She lives in a nursing home, but it's truly been a roller coaster ride.
I'm so sorry to hear that, and we're definitely going to dive more into that story. Also joining us tonight is caregiver Sharon Ginn. Sharon, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story. Talk about how Alzheimer's has impacted your life.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for this opportunity. And thank you, Ken, the president and CEO, for having me. The impact that it has had on me is one, my mother is dealing with Alzheimer's disease. She was diagnosed in 2020. And from that standpoint, her diagnosis was made due to hearing loss. So the impact for me was first, identifying with the fact that she did have hearing loss. And then second, having her being seen by an ENT physician as well as a neurologist who further diagnosed her with onset dementia. The impact for me is having being an only child. I am my mother's primary caregiver. And it has truly, truly altered my life. It has been an experience that you cannot describe unless you're in it. And also, it has caused me to appreciate life and appreciate family, because at any time there could be this transition and this transformation where your life can be altered. It doesn't just affect the person who's been diagnosed, but it also affects the family members, friends, and caregivers.
It's a heavy burden for sure. Thank you so much again, Sharon, for coming on. Finally, our third caregiver tonight, Steve Koffler. Steve, thank you so much for coming on here tonight.
Well, thank you, Lisa Marie. And Ken, thank you very much. And thank Alzheimer's New Jersey for everything that you do. My wife, Betty, was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in fall 2009. And the physicians and neurologist was fairly certain it would lead to Alzheimer's because of the family history that she has. And in fact, it did. We know that Alzheimer's is just relentless. Betty got worse and worse. In 2015, my adult daughter Jordana and I decided that Betty would get far better care in a long-term care facility than I could give her, given her condition. And so she moved to a long-term care facility. She got great care. It was a wonderful facility. But then, as we all know, in 2020, along came COVID, and long-term care facilities were breeding grounds for COVID. Betty tested positive in late March 2020, and sadly, because of the very advanced stage of Alzheimer's, she just wasn't able to cope with COVID and died in April 2020. I miss her a lot. I miss her enormously. And she had a very, very tough last 11 years of her life. So I'm hoping tonight the discussions that Sharon and Kristen and I will have will be helpful to other caregivers, our experiences, information that we have. You can't go it alone. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to help you and at least give you some information tonight.
Well, thank you for coming on here tonight and honoring your wife's memory while helping so many people. And finally, Ken Zaentz, the president of Alzheimer's New Jersey. Ken, why are conversations like the one we're about to have here so important?
Well, first of all, Lisa Marie, thank you for for hosting this really important program tonight, and of course, Kristen, Sharon, and Steve. We appreciate your willingness to share your really personal stories, and I think we've already heard why an evening like this one is so important, and why these conversations are so important. Alzheimer's disease has a personal and community impact, particularly in our state, that I don't think everyone realizes. It affects families across generations, spouses, partners, children, and grandchildren. But it also has tremendous social and emotional impact, not only on those families, but also on our economy and on our healthcare system. So, Steve, Sharon, and Kristen represent about 190,000 New Jersey citizens who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease. So I hope what happens tonight is exactly as Steve said, probably better than I'm going to say it. We want people to understand those experiences, to understand the personal, financial, and economic impact that Alzheimer's disease has on families in New Jersey and on our state. And we also want people who are out there right now watching this, who are caregivers themselves, knowing that they do not have to face this disease alone. So though all of those things are just so important and so much a part of the work that Alzheimer's New Jersey does.
Thank you, Ken. Well, tonight is Giving Tuesday, and we chose to do this in a very special way on this special night. And we encourage everybody to visit alznj.org for more information and to donate, so Alzheimer's New Jersey can continue to provide the support and programs that you're about to hear tonight. So I want to dive into the first time you realized that your loved one was having issues. And Sharon, I'm going to start with you because I just thought in your intro, it was so interesting to hear how your mother was diagnosed via her going to the doctor for another issue.
Yes.
But did you have an inkling something bigger was going on?
I did not, to be honest. Lisa, I was just concerned because my mom was playing the television very loud. She would have her music. She loved listening to the radio, and the volume would be very loud. And it was concern for me. And I would say to her, Mom, why is the television so loud? And she would become very argumentative with me. It's not loud. What are you talking about? And so that was a major concern for me. And that's when I took the initiative to call an ENT and have her assessed. And the determination was made that she had hearing loss. But it was about 3 years before my mother would have accepted the fact that there was hearing loss. I had taken her to 2 separate ENT specialists to make that diagnosis and to confirm that it was happening. And she would not accept it until she began to become isolated. And they had also expressed to me that during that isolation period, that if you notice her moving forward to any parties, it's because she cannot hear them. And before she would acknowledge that she's not able to hear, you will see her body gestures and she would move inward to hear what one was saying. So for me, that's how I recognized that there was an issue, through the fact of the volume in the television, the radio, and then speaking to her. And she would constantly say to me, what? Ask that question. And I was like, you cannot hear me? And she's like, what? You're just speaking too softly. You speak too soft. And with all of those factors in place, that's how we came about the diagnosis for my mom.
So interesting. Kristen, I want to bring you into this because your mother got diagnosed when you were so young.
Yeah, I was 20, I think freshly 22. And I would say I was commuting into the city at that point for work. I'm a publicist, and I've grown up in the same town my entire life. My family, until 2020, lived there for 35 years. And my parents would come and pick me up. They were both retired at the time. They would come and pick me up from the train station when I came home from work. And there were a few times where my mom would turn to me and say, "How do I get home? Is this the right turn?" And it was so strange to me because there was no rhyme or reason as to why she wouldn't be able to understand a route home that she had taken countless times before. And we started noticing, pots left on the stove when the stove was on, and they would bubble over, or doors were left unlocked. The dogs would spend an hour or two in the backyard because she would forget to bring him in. And that was, I think, cumulatively, all of those things happening consistently really alerted us that there was a problem. But, with the benefit of hindsight, our family has looked back and determined that actually the disease was probably taking place even years prior to that. My mother was always the head of the household. In my senior year of college, she forgot to send in the tuition bill, which is such a consequential mistake. Everything turned out fine, spoiler, but it was so unlike her. And at the time, we chalked it up to just sheer forgetfulness. It was a hiccup. But looking back, we think that there were actually signs beforehand that she either dismissed or frankly just hid out of shame and fear.
Yeah, well, because life is hectic, right?
Yeah.
So you're running around, you're balancing a million and one things. You forget things a lot. Everybody does, right? Your keys, your cell phone, vital things you leave on the counter. So yeah, maybe sometimes you just chalk it up to life, right? So that's what makes the diagnosis, I think, even scarier. Well, thank you, Kristen. Steve, how about you? When did you notice the change in your wife?
Well, I think in early fall 2009, independently, Jordana, my daughter, and I both noticed some significant changes in Betty, in her demeanor, in her, there was far more lethargy. She was far less outgoing. She was far less interested in doing things that she typically loved to do. And she just wasn't herself. I thought it was clinical depression because soon, shortly before then, there were two very significant negative events. One was that her cousin died, and she was very, very close to her cousin, and that affected her a great deal. And second, she was in a car accident that was her fault. And so I thought because of those two events, she was depressed. I spoke to her primary care physician, who suggested that we see a psychiatrist. Betty recognized that there was a problem, and she was willing to see the psychiatrist. And so we did. The psychiatrist said no, no depression, and he recommended that we see a neurologist. We did that. The neurologist then wanted Betty to undergo cognitive testing. So she went through a battery of 8 hours of cognitive testing with a clinical psychologist. The result was the diagnosis was mild cognitive impairment that both the neurologist and the clinical psychologist thought would lead to Alzheimer's because she has a family history. Her mother died from Alzheimer's, her grandmother died from Alzheimer's, some of her great uncles died from Alzheimer's. And so, sadly, the torch was passed to Betty. Look, no disease is good. I hope none of us ever has to face any disease. But people there's a tangible way of knowing if you have cancer. There's a cancerous tumor. There's a tangible way of knowing whether a person has heart disease. There's a blockage in the artery. There is no tangible evidence that can determine whether someone has dementia. And so, what I would advise or suggest to people is if you notice a change in your wife, husband, mom, dad, friend, that's significant. Depression, a mood change, interest change, don't assume it will go away. Be proactive, see a doctor. As Lisa said, though, I mean, is there anyone among us who hasn't forgotten where we've put our keys or have gone to the grocery store to get orange juice, gotten some other stuff, came home and forgot the orange juice? That's certainly not dementia. That's just aging, as you can tell from my hair. And there's a difference between dementia and the normal things that we forget with aging. But be aware, be proactive, and see a doctor, and hope that it is just aging. But it's important to really get out in front of problems that you see, changes that you see in someone that you love.
Well, Steve, you went right into my next couple questions. Sharon, I'll come back to you. So once you got the sort of diagnosis from the doctor, talk about the process after that to get that clear pathway for your mother.
Okay, sure. Once the diagnosis was made with the ENT physician, I interned, went to the neurologist, and my mother was also seen by two separate neurologists because I wanted sound confirmation. And with that being said, there were MRI testing that was conducted. There was also CAT scans that were done. And it was determined through the MRIs that my mom had brain shrinkage. And from that point on, we went to the primary care physician, and the primary care physician finalized the diagnosis. And because of my mother still being cognitive, she refused medication. So until today, which is 2.5 years later that the diagnosis was made, we are still not having any result of medication to know if we can, in some way, we can't prevent it, but we can try to slow the progression. And my mother has opted not to take medication to slow the progression. So in the past year, I have seen a decline. So to answer the question, it was through MRI testing, and the MRI testing confirmed the diagnosis.
As her primary caregiver, hearing that she doesn't want to take medication to maybe slow things down, how does that make you feel?
It saddens me. It saddens me. And the reason it saddens me is because we do not know if the medication can be a preventive measure. And with her declining to be treated by such, it's almost, for me, I don't want to make this determination for her, but it appears as a selfishness, and it's hard to accept someone who was vibrant, outgoing, and today they're very combative and can be very argumentative. And it's not my mother. It's not the mother that I know. I know I have to accept what's happening and the changes, but there could be a different outcome, maybe, if she would take the medication, but she's opted not to, and I will respect her wishes.
Kristen, I want to bring you in. Talk to us about the process in diagnosing your mother. You're 22, you're fresh out of college, and you have the whole world in front of you, but instead you're hyper-focused on this.
Yeah, some of this seems like such a blur now looking back. At the time, my parents' primary physician was actually a cardiologist. And so when we brought up the memory issue, it really wasn't his area of expertise. And so we ended up going to more of a general practice. And then we were eventually kicked to a neurologist. And, what Sharon and Steve have mentioned in terms of MRI, mini mental state examinations. There's no blood, finger prick for Alzheimer's. And so the same was true when my mother was diagnosed. I will say that similar to what we were just discussing, my mother was prescribed medication at the onset of her diagnosis, but didn't choose to take it either. I think for different reasons. The diagnosis was incredibly clear, but at the time, my mother was so young. I mean, no one, most importantly herself, could believe, I think, that it was happening to her. And so we never had the discussion, but what I can only imagine was a bit of shame and fear and nervousness really trickled in to a woman that was usually so confident and vibrant and outgoing. And so we would actually find the medication hidden around the house because she was refusing to take it. It's not pleasant. That there are certain side effects to some of the medications. And at that time, our family really wanted to respect her wishes and keep the diagnosis very close to the chest and protect her dignity. And unfortunately, we were also alone in the, quite frankly, battle to have her physically treat the disease that she had been diagnosed with. So even just getting her to take medications was an uphill struggle every single day.
It's very, very sad. Kristen, I'm gonna stay with you here for this one. So when you were going through those early days, were there resources available to you and your family so you could learn how to navigate through all of this?
None that immediately come to mind. I think I remember having a clear conversation with my family, my brother and my father, about the diagnosis. And then, it felt like there should have been some sort of a natural next step to say, we have to go for checkups every few months. But even finding a neurologist to treat her on an ongoing basis was completely left up to our family. And I've had this discussion with Ken before, actually, where in the beginning of the disease, it almost feels like paralysis by analysis because you're left with little to no resources and you're just left on your own to Google. And there's so much information. And at that time, speaking as a 22-year-old primary caregiver, there was also a lot of information that wasn't necessarily applicable to my particular family situation. And so just the onslaught of trying to make all of these incredibly consequential decisions, it almost felt like, I won't speak for the rest of my family, but it felt like we couldn't possibly take the next step because we didn't know what we didn't know, and who were we to know if the next step was the right one. But I can't recall, outside of when I finally found Alzheimer's New Jersey, a particular resource that I could turn to when we received the diagnosis. A lot of it, unfortunately, was left up to our family to just sort of wade through and figure it out on our own.
That is so stressful in an already stressful situation. So I can't imagine. Steve, how about you? Did you have any sort of roadmap when your wife was diagnosed?
Well, I want to reinforce what Kristen said. Diagnosis of Alzheimer's life-changing, obviously, not just for Betty, not just for the person who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but also for the family. Because all of a sudden, a vibrant, intelligent, successful, outgoing person is on a path that will leave her incapable of doing anything and being completely dependent on someone else. And that someone else, in my case, was me. I was Betty's husband, and I'm still Betty's husband. And I'm the primary caregiver. I never went to school to learn how to deal with Alzheimer's. No one ever told me about what needed to be done. What can I do? How can I provide her help and support? I think one of the problems is that the physicians focus on the medical aspects, and obviously that's their job. That's okay, but they don't provide any guidance to the family. They don't say, Betty, Steve, I'm really sorry. Betty, you have mild cognitive impairment. We think it's going to lead to Alzheimer's. And this is what I think you should read. This is people who I think you should talk with. There's an organization in New Jersey called Alzheimer's New Jersey. My suggestion is that you get in touch with them. It's like Kristen said, you're pretty much on your own and you have nowhere to go, which is why I think that Alzheimer's New Jersey is such an important organization. This is Ken, this is not a commercial for you. It's just the truth. Alzheimer's in New Jersey is such an important organization. The first time I called, I spoke with someone for over an hour. He just stayed on the phone with me. We pretty much bonded. Unfortunately, his wife also had Alzheimer's, and so we were able to create a friendship over that. But he spent over an hour, and that's not atypical. People at Alzheimer's New Jersey are very caring. They provide a great deal of help. There's a helpline there. They do consultations. They oversee support groups. They have extraordinary educational programs about the disease itself, about being a caregiver, about training, about safety issues, which are so important. They have a respite scholarship, or I'm not sure what it's called. I would, for people who are listening in, if you've not taken advantage of Alzheimer's New Jersey, I would strongly encourage you to do that. They're just an extraordinary organization. And, some of us, unfortunately myself included, think we're tough guys. We can do everything by ourselves. We can't. There's an old African proverb which says that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it also takes a village to care for someone who has Alzheimer's. You can't do it alone. Take advantage of Alzheimer's New Jersey. I can't say enough good things about them. They're really a top-notch organization, and they've provided such good information and such good services, and they deserve our support.
Well, thank you for that wonderful testimony. We certainly didn't ask for that, but I know Ken loves it. And for those watching, you could visit alznj.org for more information on their programs, resources, and also to donate tonight on Giving Tuesday. Sharon, how about you? When you got the diagnosis, did you have any sort of help in navigating your new life?
I reached out to, as Steve stated, I reached out to Alzheimer's New Jersey because this was totally something that was alarming for me, and the level of acceptance I had to accept. And as I stated, being an only child, was dealing with it alone. My daughter was there, but it was also that period of just wanting to protect my mother and her confidentiality. So I did do my research, as Kristen stated. I went on Google and I put in dementia and I put in Alzheimer's, and there it was, Alzheimer's of New Jersey. And I reached out to them, and they informed me that there was a support group. And I did not hesitate to become a part and to take advantage of the support group. And it's helped me. It's helped me. The respite care scholarship was also provided, which was also beneficial. And I'm appreciative to the Alzheimer's New Jersey Association, because if it had not been for this association, I could honestly say, I don't know how I would have been able to cope, because it is not easy. It is a challenge. And as Steve has just stated, it does take a village to raise a child. And as it's also stated, we are once an adult, but twice a child. And I see where my mom has reverted to being that child. And I do need that village. And Alzheimer's of New Jersey has been that village for me. So I am very much grateful for what this organization has presented and what they stand for. And most of all, they stand for collaboration and cooperation. And it means a lot because it stems beyond the four walls in Roseland, New Jersey. It goes nationwide, and I'm grateful.
Well, thank you, Sharon. I want to bring the president of Alzheimer's New Jersey, Ken Zaentz, in. Ken, this disease is not new, right? But it's just sickening to hear these people get this diagnosis that is already so gut-wrenching, and they're basically pushed out of the airplane with no parachute. I mean, prior to Sharon and Steve finding Alzheimer's New Jersey, they had no idea what to do. Kristen had no idea what to do. So many people have no clue what to do with this diagnosis. Even getting the diagnosis, as we heard, is a huge process. Why is that?
Well, I think you're pointing out one of the weaknesses, in our healthcare system. I mean, I think because there isn't a lot of awareness of the disease, and a lot of as much experience as we would like, in the medical community, and because it's a terminal illness, unfortunately, with no cure right now, or really even a way to stop the progression, sometimes, physicians don't know what to say. So they, so they don't and aren't aware of, providing some of the resources that possibly could be provided. But I think it is important for families to know that there is help out there. And Steve said it best before. I mean, if it was just a referral to Alzheimer's New Jersey, that would be so helpful, after the diagnosis. So it's it's a complicated disease. It is difficult to diagnose, although we're certainly much better at doing that than we were before. I think there's a lot more physician education that's needed, and I think that would really help.
Another theme that I noticed in hearing the answers of our caregivers here tonight is the stigma around the disease, the shame, the wanting to kind of almost ignore it, not taking their medication. Why is that still so rampant among Alzheimer's disease patients and their families?
I think I think it's gotten a lot better. It can be embarrassing, I think, when when your loved one is acting inappropriately. I think that I think we don't, because the disease is not physical, at least in the early stages. I think people are, embarrassed, and they want to keep it private. But and they're losing these connections, these lifelong connections with a loved one, and so there's so much emotion involved in it. So I think that is really, that's really part of what happens. We want people to know, though, that there is help out there, that people can turn to Alzheimer's New Jersey. And while we can't cure the disease today, and we can't slow down the progression of the disease, there are things that we can do to help families live with better quality of life. And that's what we try to do, as an organization. We want to be that touch point. We want to be that support system for families out there who are going through this.
Again, I encourage everyone watching to please visit alznj.org. There you'll find information, their helpline number, and please donate tonight on Giving Tuesday. In these last 15 minutes, I want to now talk about the caregiver. And Kristen, I'll start with you. How did Alzheimer's disease change your family dynamic?
Well, I think I was really lucky in that, my brother and father and I have always been really on the same page and sort of in lockstep in terms of my mother's care. And you hear some horror stories about families with differing opinions. So I'm very fortunate in that respect. But I will say, irregardless of how well my my family as a caregiving unit team has gotten along. I was 22 when my mom was diagnosed. I mean, from a financial standpoint, there were so many out-of-pocket costs that even I, fresh out of school, assumed myself because there's just no resource to pay for it otherwise. Even from a professional standpoint, I was starting my career, and I've been really lucky to have worked at a number of places that have taken the diagnosis in stride and have been incredibly supportive. But, for instance, I remember the day we moved my mother into a nursing home, I was brought into a number of fire drill phone calls with a client. And so those moments that I was meant to spend with my mother, those last moments in our family home together, I was being ripped away for work. And those are moments that I can't get back. So even professionally, while my organizations that I've worked for have been supportive, it's still always, you always have one foot in, one foot out. And even romantically, in the back of my mind, I was in my 20s, I was dating, it was part of my checklist. Will this person be a good partner? Not only to me as a caregiver, but to my family. Will they accept my mother? And so it really seeps into truly every single facet of your life, every single one.
And then how do you remember to take care of yourself, though? You have work, your boyfriend, your family, your mom, but what about Kristen?
Not well at first, I have to admit. My now husband was actually really, he was the one who really pushed me towards seeing a therapist when we first started dating, which was such a huge help. But even before that, I think like the first steps that I really started to take, towards remembering and even acknowledging that it was having such an impact was through Alzheimer's New Jersey. I actually met a community of young professional caregivers like myself. And that was the first time I heard other people my age saying, wow, this disease really sucks. And I'm having a really hard time with X and Y. And I could go, I'm having a really hard time with X and Y. And it felt like therapy, just being able to talk to them, but then also having strategies finally to sort of cope with everything. That was my first taste at any degree of sort of respite was through the organization. But it took a long time because it's all consuming, particularly at first. It's all consuming.
Yeah. Steve, how about you? How did the diagnosis impact your family dynamic and outside of your family?
Well, I'm very fortunate. We have one daughter. She's 39, Jordana, and she's just an extraordinary person. She's very caring. We were partners in all of this, even though she was an adult and wasn't living at home. And I think actually, just as an aside, going back to something Kristen said, I think for Kristen, for Jordana, Jordana was 26 when her mom was diagnosed. She was 37 when her mom died. For a third of her life, she didn't really have a mother figure. And I think that's similar to Kristen. And that's it's very sad. It's very unfortunate. It's very sad. But Jordana was really like a rock to me. For part of the time, she was living in London, but that didn't stop her from coming back here when necessary. When we made the decision to put Betty into a long-term care facility, Jor came back and scouted out some of the long-term care facilities and stayed here as we transitioned from home to the long-term care facility. And just to build on, Lisa Marie, what you had said, Jordana was also the voice of reason to me. She kept telling me again and again, Dad, you have to reclaim your life, because Alzheimer's, being a caregiver, is 24/7. It's all encompassing. And what Jordana was telling me was that I shouldn't feel guilt in occasionally doing something that I wanted to do for myself. And I hope people who are listening will take that to heart as well. It's difficult to be the primary caregiver. It's all encompassing. It's emotional. It's physically draining. It's draining in every way. And every so often, you just need to step back and do something for yourself. There's no guilt. There's no problem in doing that. In fact, you know, it makes you a better caregiver because it lets you recharge yourself and step back and take a breath. So I would encourage everybody to do that, and occasionally do what Jordana told me, reclaim your life, do something for yourself.
How have you done that in the past couple years now that she's no longer with us?
Well, I think it's now a different story where I I'm not the caregiver anymore. I find things difficult. Quite frankly, I hate doing things myself or by myself, but I do. Actually, in some respects, I lost Betty a long time ago, or the woman who I married and loved for all those years left a long time ago. I think Sharon was saying before that, there comes a point in time where the adult becomes childlike. And Betty was at a very advanced stage of Alzheimer's. She was absolutely incapable of doing anything for herself. She needed help from the moment she woke up till the moment she went to bed. She didn't recognize Jordana nor me nor anyone. She was not able to communicate very much. She really was a very advanced stage Alzheimer's, and you know, it's certainly not easy being the caregiver. Well, as I said, it's emotionally draining, it's physically draining. You have to think about everything. You're taking care of a child. You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your house. Things that you do normally, or that the two of you did normally. Now it's all what it is. But I think really the most difficult part is the emotional part of seeing someone whom you've loved and been married to for so many years deteriorate to an extent where she doesn't know anyone. She's not capable of doing anything by herself.
Yeah. Sharon, how did this disease impact your family, your social circle, and career?
It has affected me in a major way. There's been separation, division amongst my family, and it's simply because, as I stated earlier, I'm trying to protect my mom because there are so many of us that are unaware of what the disease is and what it encompasses. And with that being said, my mother has a tendency of sundowning, which we did not mention during this session, but she sundown. And the sundowning can come at any time. It could be in the midday or it could be in the evening. And with that, my mother's attitude changes. She becomes very combative. So for me, it has changed my life tremendously because I'm constantly concerned about my mom and protecting her from going out. And she may say something to someone and they don't understand that she is sundowning, and it will just exacerbate the condition more and agitate her more. So to answer the question, my life has been altered. It's altered my life so much that just recently I was employed and I had to make a decision. And unfortunately, the company made the decision for me. And it was a contingent assignment, which would have become a permanent assignment, but they opted to release me from that assignment. And it was a blessing in disguise because I needed to make a choice whether to be home with my mom or to go out and continue to work. And as Steve said, it affects us economically as well, because in doing so, I had additional caregivers to come in and they needed to be compensated. So what insurance wasn't paying for, I was paying out of pocket, and it became very costly. So the decision of being released by the employer, instead of it being a negative, it was a positive for me because it allowed me to be home with my mother and to take care of my mom. My social life, I am getting back out there. As Steve also mentioned, his daughter reinforced that you have to live. And in doing so, I have become a volunteer with the South Orange Performing Arts Center, and that is my outlet. That is my outlet to have a social life, to connect with others, to, as I would use as my quote for Sharon, is to live and to love to the fullest. And that allows me to do such.
That is a beautiful note to end on, Sharon. Thank you so much. Really quick before we wrap, Steve, I'll come back to you. Very quickly, any advice for those watching that are just entering this caregiver journey? What do you want them to know?
Well, several things, I think. Number one, you can't do it alone. Like we said before, it takes a village to help someone. Don't think that you're a tough guy and that you can do it yourself. You need support. Second, take advantage of Alzheimer's New Jersey. Again, they're an extraordinary organization. Third, I'm sure everyone has family who gives them support, friends who give them support, but sometimes you just have to talk to someone, another caregiver, another person who's been a caregiver, who is a caregiver for someone who has Alzheimer's, because you just need to talk to somebody who's been there, who you can commiserate with, who you can talk to. Second to last, take care of yourself. And then finally, Sharon talked about sundowning, and that's obviously something very significant. People, sometimes I think you may be in a situation where the person who you love and who you're taking care of tells you that he or she hates you and that you get out of here and curses at you. Know that that's not the person. That's the Alzheimer's that's talking. And last, always treat the person with who your loved one, the person who has Alzheimer's, with dignity, with respect. Betty used to tell me occasionally, "Gee, I just talked to my mother, and so and so and so." Well, her mother died 20 years ago, but that's okay. We would talk about what she talked about with her mother. You need to always give all of us dignity and respect and care. But most importantly, I think you can't do it alone. And Alzheimer's New Jersey is an extraordinary organization. Make use of them.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing your story and for all of that wonderful advice, especially, going along with the patient and learning how to delicately balance what they're going through as well. I love that. Thank you. Kristen, finally, any last thoughts that you want that 22-year-old that's in your shoes watching this? What do you want them to know?
I think looking back, going through this process taught me a lot about how I grieve, how different people grieve, how my father grieved, how my brother grieved, how her family grieved, her friends grieved. And it's very different for every single person. And like Steve touched on a little bit, there needs to be that understanding and, more importantly, grace. It's hard not to be hard on yourself as a caregiver. There are going to be some days where you snap at your loved one and you break down in tears, or they break down in tears. But you know what? At the end of the day, my mother was always safe. She was always fed. She was always well taken care of. And that was a win. That was a win that day, even if it wasn't necessarily the greatest or the smoothest. And that was something I think was really hard for me to understand for a number of years, still is. But to have a bit of grace with yourself and understand that there is a community of people that exists through Alzheimer's New Jersey in particular who are going through all of these motions right there with you, and you can lean on them. I think that's incredibly important.
Kristen, thank you so, so much. You're such an inspiration, and best of luck to you and everything you do.
Thank you.
Ken, before we sign off for the night, anything that you would like our audience to know?
Well, look, I've sort of sat here in sort of awe of the courage and compassion that Kristen, Steve, and Sharon have expressed in what is a very challenging situation for us as an organization. It's really an honor to be trusted as they've trusted us, and as so many other families have, to really be part of their families and to help them through the challenges of this disease. But I guess I'd be, because it's Giving Tuesday, I just want to end by saying, we can't do what we do without charitable contributions. And, that's what Giving Tuesday is all about. This day really puts an emphasis and a recognition on the importance of what we can all achieve through charitable contributions. But I also want to say that it's a day that ends in about, well, it's 8, so we've got only another few hours left. But really, every day is a giving day, and we're in that, that season of giving, this holiday season. So, I would just want to emphasize that, anything that people can do to help us so that we can continue to help families like Steve's and Kristen's and Sharon's is greatly appreciated.
Well, Ken, thank you for trusting me with this honor tonight. It's always a pleasure working with you and spreading this very important message. And it's been so amazing getting to know Kristen, Sharon, Steve. I mean, those are just 3 of the many stories that this disease impacts. And I just applaud their bravery, like you said, Ken. And they're just so inspiring in what they do in their everyday lives. So thank you, Ken. Thank you,
welcome.
caregivers.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Once more, please visit alznj.org for more information and to donate on this Giving Tuesday. I'm Lisa Marie Falbo, and have a great night.